The torches in the iron hall of Kervrith burned so bright they turned the ancient stone walls to gold. Soraya pressed her spine flat against the pillar behind the western gallery, her fingers digging into the rough granite until her knuckles bled white. Below her, the hall churned with hundreds of wolves in their finest leathers and silks, shoulder to shoulder, breath held, every pair of eyes locked on the obsidian dais at the far end of the chamber. The Ascension Rite. Once, every generation, the Alpha King declared his Luna before the united bloodlines of the realm. The woman who would share his throne, bear his heirs, and bind her spirit to his wolf for eternity. Soraya had not been invited. She had come anyway, slipping past the outer sentries in a borrowed servant's cloak, climbing the forgotten staircase behind the kitchens that led to the gallery overlooking the hall. She had told herself she only needed to see. That seeing would be enough. It was not enough. Rendell stood at the center of the dais, and the sight of him split her open like a wound. He wore the black armor of the first kings, the plates etched with silver runes that caught the torchlight and threw it back in fractured sparks. His dark hair was pulled back from his face, bearing the sharp lines of his cheekbones, the hard set of his jaw, the mouth that had whispered her name against her throat only 4 nights ago. 4 nights. That was all. 4 nights since he had held her in the cave behind the Ashfall Ridge, his hands trembling against her bare skin, his wolf so close to the surface that his eyes had burned molten gold when he looked at her. "When the rite is finished," he had told her, his voice rough with emotion, "I will present you to the court. You are my fated mate, Soraya. The bond does not lie. No council, no alliance, no political arrangement will change what the spirits themselves have ordained." She had pressed her forehead to his chest and believed every word. Now she stood hidden in the shadows, watching the man she loved prepare to choose someone else. Her hand drifted to the place below her navel. Something impossibly small had taken root. She had felt the change 3 mornings ago. A faint warmth that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. A presence so new and fragile that she had not yet found the courage to speak it aloud. She had planned to tell him tonight, after the rite. When he came to her chamber the way he always did, through the hidden passage behind the tapestry, smelling of pine and wood smoke, and the wild places where his wolf ran free. She had practiced the words 100 times. "The candidates will present themselves before the Alpha King." The voice of the ancestors announced from the foot of the dais. He was ancient, his white beard brushing the front of his ceremonial robes, his voice carrying through the hall like the toll of a funeral bell. 7 women ascended the dais steps in single file, each one draped in white silk that shimmered like fresh snow under the torchlight. They were the daughters of the 7 great packs, the most powerful bloodlines in Kervrith. But it was the last woman in line who made the hall fall completely silent. Irenka of the Duskfang. She moved like smoke given form. Her hair fell in sheets of pale gold, her ice-blue eyes sweeping the crowd with the calm authority of a woman who already knew the outcome. The Duskfang pack controlled the Thornwall Mountains, the only passage between the eastern and western territories. Their warriors numbered 5,000. Their wealth was measured in iron mines and timber forests that supplied half the kingdom's construction. Soraya knew this. The kingdom needed strength, stability, a Luna whose bloodline would command respect and whose dowry would fill the treasury. The kingdom did not need a nobody healer from a dead village with no name, no title, and no pack to call her own. But Rendell had chosen her anyway, in secret, in darkness, in the hidden spaces where rank and blood meant nothing. He had bitten the inside of her left wrist, the claiming mark, and sealed the bond with his own blood. She could still feel it now, a low thrum beneath her pulse, a second heartbeat that echoed his. She held her marked wrist against her chest and waited. Rendell, Alpha King of Kervrith, son of the Iron Wolves, blood of the everlasting pack. The 7 bloodlines have presented their daughters, The spirits have witnessed. The realm awaits your declaration." The hall held its breath. Soraya held hers. She watched Rendell's face with desperate intensity, searching for any crack in his expression, any flicker of the man who had kissed the underside of her jaw and called her his home. She found nothing. His face was blank, not composed, not controlled. Blank. As if someone had reached inside his skull and scraped away everything that made him who he was. His eyes were dull, flat, like coins pressed into the face of a corpse. Something was wrong. "I declare," Rendell said, and his voice was a hollow thing, emptied of every tone and texture she knew. "Irenka of the Dusk Fang as my Luna, and bound mate before the spirits and the blood." The iron hall erupted. Howls of triumph shook dust from the ancient rafters. Warriors stamped their boots against the stone floor. Nobles embraced. Elders wept with satisfaction. And the claiming mark on Soraya's wrist caught fire. She clamped her free hand over her mouth to muffle the scream that tore up her throat. The pain was savage, a searing, tearing agony, as if invisible claws were ripping the mark from her flesh. She doubled over behind the pillar, her vision fracturing into shards of light and darkness. Through the haze, she watched Rendell take Irenka's hand, watched him press his lips to the back of it in the ritual gesture of acceptance, watched Irenka smile, slow, satisfied, victorious, while the man Soraya loved stood beside her with all the animation of a marionette on severed strings. He did not search the gallery. He did not hesitate. He did not flinch. And then, she ran. The servants' passages of Kervrith were carved into the bones of the mountain itself, narrow, unlit, and cold enough to turn breath to frost. The corridors were empty. Soraya moved through them on instinct, one hand pressed against the stone wall for balance, the other wrapped tight around her midsection. Her feet were bare. She had kicked off her shoes somewhere in the gallery, unable to bear even that small constraint against the panic consuming her body. The claiming mark on her wrist pulsed with each heartbeat, each pulse a fresh bolt of pain. Among the wolf bloodlines, a rejected bond was supposed to dissolve cleanly. The mark would fade. The connection would sever. Both parties would feel a brief, sharp grief, and then nothing. This was not that. This felt like something being held together by force while the world tried to tear it apart. Soraya stumbled into her chamber. A narrow room beside the herb stores, barely large enough for a cot and a wooden chest. She had lived here for 8 months, ever since the castle's head healer had taken pity on the packless wanderer with a gift for mending wounds. She pulled the chest from beneath her cot and began to fill it with unsteady hands, her dried herbs, her bone-handled knife, the leather pouch of silver coins she had saved from her healing work, her mother's ring, a thin band of hammered copper that was the only thing she had carried out of the ruins of her birth village. 8 months. Long enough to learn the castle's secrets. Long enough to catch the eye of a king. Long enough to fall in love with him. She paused. On the windowsill, a single black feather lay where Rendell had placed it the last time he visited her chamber. A raven's feather. In the old tongue, it meant "I will return to you." Soraya picked it up, held it between her fingers, felt the softness of it against her skin. Then she broke it in half and let the pieces fall. She could not take mementos of a man who had just declared another woman his Luna before the entire kingdom. She could not carry tokens of a love that had apparently existed only in her imagination. The warmth below her navel pulsed again, insistent, as if the tiny life inside her was protesting. "I know," Soraya whispered, her hand moving to cover the spot. "I know, but we cannot stay." She pulled her heaviest cloak around her shoulders, lifted the chest onto her hip, and moved toward the servants' gate at the base of the eastern tower. The gate opened onto the forest road that led down the mountain and away from Kervrith, away from the Iron Hall, away from the man who had sworn she was his and then given himself to another without so much as a backward glance. At the gate, she stopped. The night was black and moonless, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound and shape alike. Snow had begun to fall, thick, heavy flakes that would cover her tracks within an hour. Good. Soraya pressed her marked wrist to her lips. The skin was hot to the touch, the bond beneath it writhing like a living thing. You chose her, she said to the darkness, to the castle, to the man somewhere inside it who was probably already leading his new Luna to the royal chambers. You looked at 7 women and chose the one who was not me, so I am choosing too. I choose to leave. I choose to survive. And I choose to raise this child without a father who could not keep a single promise. She stepped through the gate and let the winter take her. Behind her, the castle blazed with celebration. Music and howling drifted down the mountainside, carried on the wind like the sounds of a world that had already forgotten she existed. She did not see the shadow that detached itself from the tower above the gate. She did not see the figure that staggered to the window of the royal chamber, shoving aside the woman who reached for his arm, his hands clawing at his own skull as if trying to tear something loose from inside it. And she did not hear the sound that split the night 3 minutes after she disappeared. A howl so raw, so shattered, so drenched in agony that the wolves guarding the castle walls dropped to their bellies and pressed their ears flat. By the time Rendell reached the servants' gate, barefoot and wild-eyed, the snow had already begun to fill Soraya's footprints. By dawn, there was no trace of her at all. 4 months had passed since the night Soraya vanished from Kervrith. She had walked for 11 days through the winter mountains, sleeping in hollowed trees and abandoned shepherds' huts, eating dried herbs and whatever roots she could dig from the frozen ground. The child inside her had kept her warm, impossibly, unnaturally warm, as if the tiny spark of life carried its own furnace. She had collapsed on the doorstep of a farmstead at the edge of a village called Brackenmoor, a settlement so small that most maps did not bother to include it. The farmer's wife, Hada, had carried her inside, fed her broth, and asked no questions. Within weeks, she had become the village healer. Brackenmoor had not had one in years. She set bones, she stitched wounds, she brewed tinctures for fever and poultices for infection. She delivered the tanner's wife of a healthy boy and saved the miller's hand after a grinding stone crushed 3 of his fingers. The villagers called her Neve. She had chosen the name because it meant nothing, belonged to no one, and carried no history. She had built a life, a small one, a quiet one, a life measured in herb bundles drying from the rafters and the slow turn of seasons from frost to thaw. But the wound inside her had not healed. Every night, after the last patient had gone and the cottage was dark and still, Soraya lay on her narrow cot with her hands pressed to her swelling belly and felt the world collapse inward. She did not cry anymore. The tears had burned themselves out somewhere during the 2nd week of her journey, replaced by a hollow ache that sat behind her sternum like a stone. The claiming mark on her wrist was the worst of it. It should have faded. Among the wolf-blooded, a severed bond left no trace. The mark dissolved within days, leaving clean skin and a clean break. Her mark had not dissolved. It had darkened. Where Rendell's bite had once left a delicate pattern of silver-white scars, the skin now showed lines of deep charcoal, almost black, as if the bond was not dying but calcifying, hardening into something permanent and immovable, and it burned. Not constantly, not predictably, but at odd hours, always when the wind shifted to blow from the north, from the direction of Kervrith. The mark would flare with a heat that made her gasp and press her wrist against the cool stone wall of her cottage. Sometimes, in those moments, she felt something else through the burn. A presence, vast and desperate, reaching. She told herself it was phantom pain, nothing more. The village midwife, old Petra, had examined her twice. "You are carrying large for your months, girl. There may be more than one in there." Among fated mates, true fated mates, twins were said to be a sign of divine favor. She could not afford to think about what that might mean. "You are strong," she whispered to her belly in the darkness. "Whatever you are, whoever you become, you are strong, and you are mine." She did not add the rest, the part where she said, "And you are his. And he does not know you exist." Spring had nearly overtaken winter when the news came. 12-year-old Fen, the goatherd's son, burst into her cottage with his face flushed and his chest heaving. "Mistress Neve, riders have come from the lowlands, black and silver banners, the king's colors." The mortar slipped from her fingers and cracked against the floor. "The Alpha King has lost his mind," Fen breathed. "The riders say he has not slept since the winter solstice. He has torn apart the northern provinces looking for a woman. Anyone who hides her will be charged with treason against the crown. And there is a reward: 15,000 gold marks. My father says that is enough to buy every farm in Brackenmoor 10 times over. 15,000 gold marks. For her." Soraya placed her hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. "Did the riders say who this woman is? What she has done?" "No one knows her name. Only that she was in the castle and now she is gone. The riders carry a description: dark hair, healer's hands, a mark on her left wrist." Fen paused, his gaze dropping to Soraya's sleeve. "Mistress Neve, are you all right? You look pale." "I am fine. The cold." "Thank you for the news, Fen." When the boy had gone, Soraya sank to the floor and pressed both hands over her mouth. He was looking for her. Why? He had made his choice. Unless the blank-eyed stranger she had watched in the iron hall had not been making a choice at all. The claiming mark blazed with sudden vicious heat. And beneath the pain, clear as a voice shouting across a vast distance, she felt him. Not a phantom. Him. The baby kicked so hard that Soraya gasped, both sides at once, as if two tiny bodies were responding to the presence pressing against the edges of their mother's consciousness. False hope was a blade, and she had already bled enough, but the mark kept burning. And somewhere to the north, the Alpha King was hunting for the woman who carried his heirs. 3 days after the riders passed through Brackenmoor, the wolves came. Soraya noticed them at dusk. At the edge of the birch forest, 4 shapes stood in the failing light. Enormous, twice the size of any natural wolf, their pelts ranging from ash gray to deep russet, their eyes reflecting the last embers of sunset with an intelligence that no wild animal possessed. Shifted wolves, watching her cottage with the focused patience of hunters. The claiming mark on her wrist detonated with heat. He was close, not just his wolves. Him. Soraya's mind raced. She could run. The back door, the river path. Wolves could not track scent through running water. She had done it before. Her hand moved to her belly. The babies kicked in sharp, simultaneous protest, as if they could sense her intention and were objecting to it. A knock came at the front door. 3 measured raps. Deliberate, almost polite. Soraya grabbed the skinning knife and opened the door. 2 figures stood on her threshold. The first was a woman, tall, lean, dark hair cropped short above a face bearing decades of combat scars. The second was a young man with ink-stained fingers and a leather satchel. "Mistress Neve," the woman said, and the use of her false name was deliberate, and acknowledgement that she knew the truth and was offering this courtesy regardless. "My name is Dagny. I am Shield Commander to the Alpha King, his second, his sword arm. I think you have confused me with someone else. You are Soraya, born in the village of Kelmarsh, orphaned by border raiders at 14. No surviving family, no pack affiliation. You entered service at Kervrith and were assigned to the healing ward." Dagny's voice was even, reciting facts without emotion. You bear the king's claiming mark on your left wrist, and you carry his children in your body. Children. Plural. How do you know it is more than one? Soraya whispered. Because the king has dreamed of 2 heartbeats every night since you disappeared. His wolf reaches for you through the bond when he sleeps. He did not understand what the second heartbeat meant until I told him. Dagny's scarred face softened. May we come inside? What I have to tell you cannot be said on a doorstep. Soraya let them in. Dagny surveyed the cottage, the herbs, the narrow cot, the cracked mortar on the floor. And something shifted behind her eyes. Controlled fury at the conditions in which the king's true mate had been living. The boy is Corwin, Dagny said, gesturing to her companion. He is a record keeper. He is here because what I am about to tell you requires documentation. The truth about what? The night of the Ascension rite, someone poisoned the king. The knife slipped from Soraya's fingers. Dagny withdrew a small glass vial containing dark residue. The poison had not been in the food or wine. It had been in the ceremonial armor, in the lining of the neck guard, absorbed through the skin of the throat. A derivative of ghost root, a plant that grew only in the deep caves of the Thornwall Mountains, Duskfang territory. It severed the connection between Rendal's conscious mind and his wolf. It suppressed his instincts, his bond awareness, his ability to recognize his own mate. It turned him into a vessel that could be directed, a mouth that would speak whatever words had been rehearsed into his ears. Drugged. The blank face, the emptied voice, the flat, dead eyes. Those had not been the signs of a man choosing to abandon her. They had been the signs of a man who had been chemically stripped of his will and paraded before an audience of hundreds. When did he wake? Soraya's voice came from very far away. 2 days after the rite, the compound metabolized slowly. He regained awareness in fragments. First his wolf, then his senses, then his memory. The first coherent word he spoke was your name. Dagny paused. The second thing he did was try to kill Lord Oscaer Duskfang with his bare hands. It took 4 of his shield guard to restrain him. Corwin, the record keeper, spoke for the first time. I was there. I have never seen anything like it. The king's eyes were solid gold, not amber, gold. His wolf had full control. He would have torn through the walls of the castle to reach you if we had not physically held him down. Soraya's knees gave out. She sank into the chair beside her workbench, her hands pressed flat against her belly where 2 tiny lives stirred. If this is true, she said carefully, then why has it taken so long to find me? Because you left no trail. The snow covered your tracks. You gave a false name. You chose a village so small that our search parties passed through the region twice without stopping. Dagny's expression carried something close to respect. You are exceptionally difficult to find, Soraya. The ghost root damaged the bond, Dagny explained. Not destroyed, but weakened. He can feel you, but the direction shifts. It is like trying to follow a voice through a storm. Then Dagny produced a folded parchment bearing the Duskfang crest. 4 lines. The healer woman has been traced to the southern territories. Our agents will reach her before the king does. The problem ends before the next moon. Glory to the true Luna. They are coming to kill me, Soraya said. They are coming to kill you and the children you carry. And they are closer than we would like. From beyond the cottage walls, the loyal wolves released warning howls. Through the window, Soraya saw new shapes moving between the birch trees. Darker, sleeker, moving with the precision of trained killers. And behind them, a figure wrapped in black, face hidden behind a mask carved from animal bone, bow drawn and arrow nocked. The Duskfang hunters had arrived. The first arrow punched through the cottage window and buried itself in the wall 6 inches from Soraya's head. Nightshade resin glistened on the shaft. They were not here to capture her. Dagny shoved her toward the back of the cottage. The cellar. Now. Dagny shifted. the transformation faster than anything Soraya had ever witnessed, and her iron-dark wolf form crashed through the front door into the night. Corwin pressed himself flat against the wall, his face chalk-white, and his ink-stained hands clutching his satchel like a shield. Soraya lowered herself into the root cellar beneath her workbench and pulled the trapdoor shut. The battle raged above, the crash of bodies against cottage walls, the splintering of wood, the savage music of wolves tearing at each other in the dark. Then a yelp of pain. Unmistakably, Dagny. A heavy body hitting the ground, and cold female laughter. "Find the girl! The cellar! Check the cellar!" The trapdoor was wrenched open. A hunter reached down with one massive hand. "Come out, healer. Lord Duskfang sends his regards." Soraya seized his reaching hand and pulled. He tumbled into the cellar, his head striking stone with a crack. She scrambled over his fallen body and hauled herself up through the trapdoor. Through the ruined window, she could see Dagny's wolf form crumpled at the base of a birch tree, dark fur matted with blood. The masked archer was fitting another poisoned arrow, a finishing shot. Something inside Soraya cracked open. She had spent her entire life hiding what she was. Her mother had warned her. Healing magic in someone without pack blood would mark her as an aberration, a creature to be feared. So she had kept the gift small, controlled, invisible. She did not reach for the power. She stopped holding it back. The light that erupted from her hands was not the soft golden glow of a healer's touch. It was white, blinding. It poured from her palms like liquid fire, cascading across the ground in a wave that turned the blood-stained snow to steam. Every wolf in the clearing froze. The light was not just visible, it was felt. A pressure against the skin, a vibration in the bones, a force that spoke to the wolf in every shifted body and commanded it to submit. Soraya walked toward Dagny's fallen form, her bare feet leaving prints of white light in the snow. The babies inside her moved with a rhythm she had never felt before, not kicking, but pulsing, as if their own nascent power was feeding into hers, amplifying it, turning the stream into a flood. She knelt beside Dagny and pressed her glowing hands to the worst of the wounds, a deep gash across the wolf's flank that had exposed muscle and bone. The flesh knitted beneath her touch, tissue rebuilding itself in seconds. Dagny's eyes opened. Even in wolf form, her expression was unmistakable. Shock. The masked archer recovered first. "Witch! Lord Duskfang will pay double for a witch's head." She lunged. The white light flared like a detonation. The hunter was lifted off her feet and thrown backward into a birch trunk, the bone mask cracking in half. Most of the Duskfang wolves bolted, but 2 hunters remained, human form, armed with nightshade-coated blades, and Soraya could feel her power guttering. The white light dimmed to a flicker, then nothing. She was empty. The 2 hunters advanced. Unhurried. Professional. They could see she was spent. Soraya placed both hands on her belly and closed her eyes. The ground beneath her feet began to shake. The birch forest exploded. A wolf the color of midnight tore through the tree line with a force that sent shattered trunks spiraling into the air. It was enormous, taller at the shoulder than a draft horse, its fur so black it seemed to drink the moonlight. Its eyes burned with a golden fire so intense that the snow around it glowed as if lit from beneath. The first hunter died before he could raise his blade. The second managed one wild slash before the wolf's paw sent her cartwheeling into the darkness. The clearing went silent. Then those burning eyes found Soraya. The wolf approached her. Slowly. Each step placed with deliberate care, as if the creature understood that the woman before it was frightened and fragile, and carrying something infinitely precious. It stopped an arm's length away. And then the great black wolf lowered its head and pressed its nose to her belly. Both babies kicked at once, not randomly, but toward the point of contact, as if reaching for the presence on the other side of their mother's skin. The movement was so sudden and so strong that Soraya gasped and staggered. The wolf made a sound she had never heard from any animal, something between a sob and a prayer. "Rendal," Soraya whispered. The shift rippled through him like water through silk. The massive wolf dissolved into the shape of a man kneeling in the snow, his hands hovering over her stomach, his fingers unsteady. He looked up at her. The Alpha King of Kervrith was weeping. Soraya had imagined finding Rendal again. In the earliest weeks of her exile, before the grief had hardened into something she could carry, she had imagined 100 versions of their reunion. In some, he was cold and indifferent. In others, he was cruel. In the worst, he simply did not recognize her, looked through her the way he had looked through the crowd in the Iron Hall, with eyes that held nothing at all. She had never imagined him on his knees in the snow, with tears cutting tracks through the blood on his face. "You are alive," he breathed. "You are here. And you are—" His gaze dropped to her belly. His hand reached toward it, then stopped. "May I touch them?" he asked. She took his hand and pressed it flat against her stomach. The babies responded. A kick from the left, a kick from the right. 2 distinct lives announcing themselves. 2, he whispered. "Soraya, there are 2. Why did you not tell me?" The question shattered the moment. "Tell you?" The word came out jagged. "When exactly should I have done that, Rendal? Before you declared Irenka as your Luna? During the ceremony? Or after, when you did not come to my chamber, did not send word, and did not give me a single sign that I was anything more than a secret you had grown tired of keeping? Poisoned, Dagny told me." Soraya's hands curled into fists. "How convenient. A poison no one can identify. That erases every promise you made." Rendal rose to his feet. The moonlight caught the hollows beneath his eyes, the gauntness of a man who had been consuming himself from the inside out. "You are right," he said quietly. "I do not get to compare my suffering to yours, but I need you to hear what happened. Not as an excuse, as the truth." Soraya said nothing, but she did not walk away. "I woke 2 days after the rite in a chamber I did not recognize, wearing clothing I had not put on, with Irenka standing over me telling me I had chosen her." His jaw tightened until the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. "I had no memory of the rite. The last thing I remembered was putting on the ceremonial armor. After that, nothing. A void. As if someone had cut 4 hours out of my life with a blade. The first thing I felt when the fog cleared was the bond. Screaming, tearing at the inside of my chest like a trapped animal. My wolf knew Soraya. Before my mind could understand what had happened, my wolf knew that something catastrophic had been done to us. I ran to your chamber." His voice dropped. "I tore through the servants' corridors barefoot, with my wolf so close to the surface that the guards dropped to their knees. And when I reached your door and found it open, found the room empty, found nothing but a broken feather on the floor." He stopped, swallowed. "I have never felt anything like that moment." Soraya could feel him through the bond now, not just the burn of the mark, but his emotions bleeding through the connection. And what she felt was not performance, not manipulation. It was devastation. "I have not touched Irenka," Rendal continued. "I confined her to the Eastern Tower. I told the council the rite was void. The council threatened to remove me. Half the noble bloodlines withdrew support. The Dusk Fang called it an act of war. 3 provincial governors stopped collecting taxes in my name." He looked at her with eyes that burned like banked coals. "My kingdom is fracturing, Soraya, and I have not cared. Not for a single moment. Because none of it matters without you." The words hung in the cold air between them. "I have spent every night since the rite reaching for you through the bond," he said. "My wolf, when I finally sleep, searches for you in the dark. I send pieces of myself across whatever distance separates us, hoping you can feel me, hoping you know that I am coming." Soraya's breath caught. "The dreams," she whispered. "What dreams?" "I felt you. At night. A presence in the dark, pressing against the edges of my mind. I told myself it was phantom pain." "You were not imagining it." Rendall's voice was barely audible. "Every time you felt me, I felt you. A pulse of warmth in the middle of a frozen wasteland. It was the only thing that kept me from losing my mind entirely." "I was going to tell you that night," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "About the baby. I had it all planned. I was going to wait in my chamber after the rite, and when you came through the passage behind the tapestry, I was going to take your hand and press it here." She touched her belly. "And watch your face. When you understood." A sound escaped Rendall that had no name. His whole body contracted as if absorbing a physical blow. "Instead, I watched you choose her, and I ran. And I have spent every day since telling myself that the man I loved was never real, that the promises were lies, that the bond was something I imagined because I wanted so badly to belong to someone." She was crying now, tears she had thought she no longer possessed streaming down her face. "Do you understand what that costs, Rendall? To love someone so completely that their betrayal makes you doubt your own sanity?" Rendall closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands found her face, palms warm against her frozen cheeks, thumbs catching the tears. "You are not insane," he whispered. "The bond is real. I am real. And I will spend every remaining day of my life proving that the man who held you in that cave and called you his home was the true version of me, not the hollow thing that stood on that dais." A sob tore loose from Soraya's chest. She had held it since the night she fled, compressed it into something small and hard and manageable. But now, with his hands on her face and his words dismantling every defense she had built, it broke free. She hit his chest with her fist. Not hard, with the accumulated force of months of agony and love that had refused to die, no matter how many times she tried to kill it. He caught her wrist, the marked one, and pressed his lips to the darkened scar. The bond ignited. Not fully, but enough. A surge of connection that shot through both of them. His emotions flooded into her, rage and grief and relief, and a love so vast it had no edges. And hers poured into him. "Come home," he said. "Let me protect you. Let me protect them. The Dusk Fang will answer for what they have done. But I cannot fight this war without you beside me." Before Soraya could answer, Dagny limped forward from the tree line. "My king. The hunter you threw into the forest survived. She was wearing a messenger's bracer. She has already sent word to the Dusk Fang. They know about Soraya. They know about the children. And they know about her power." Rendall's expression hardened from tender to lethal in the space between heartbeats. "Then we move tonight." His hand found Soraya's in the dark. "Together?" he asked. "Together," she said, and meant it. They rode through the night on horses Dagny had stashed at a farmstead 2 miles from Brackenmoor. Rendall behind Soraya on the largest horse, his body curved around hers like a shield, one arm locked across her middle, the other holding the reins. His wolves flanked them in a moving perimeter, and behind them, appearing in ones and twos from the darkness, more wolves. Dozens, then scores. As they rode, Rendall told her the rest. The confrontation with Lord Oskar. How the old lord had smiled when Rendall accused him of poisoning and said, with perfect calm, "Prove it. You have no evidence, no witnesses, and no memory. All you have is the word of a packless healer against the oldest bloodline in the Thornwall." He told her about the maps covered in pins and string, the scouts sent to every province, the nights he spent pacing the battlements with his wolf fighting to break free. "My wolf wanted to run," he said quietly. "Every night. It wanted to abandon the throne and simply run until it found you. The only reason I did not let it is because a feral alpha loose in the countryside would have caused more destruction than the Duskfang could dream of. Soraya leaned back against his chest. The steady beat of his heart was a metronome she had not known she needed. The mark darkened, she said. I thought it meant the bond was dying. It darkened because it was fighting. A true mate bond that is separated but not severed does not fade. It calcifies. It digs in. It refuses to release its claim. His lips brushed her temple. Just like me. Dawn came slowly, painting the mountain peaks in shades of copper and ash. The landscape changed, birch forests giving way to sparse, wind-stripped pines of the high country. The air thinned and sharpened. The road narrowed to a track barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. They were climbing toward Kervrith. Toward home. The words surfaced in Soraya's mind before she could stop it, and she felt Rendal react through the bond. A pulse of warmth, fierce and hopeful, as if he had heard the thought itself. He pressed his lips to her hair and said nothing. Some things did not need words. She thought about the life she had built in Brackenmoor, the cottage, the herb bundles, the mortar and pestle that she had come to think of as extensions of her own hands. She thought about Hada, who had carried a half-dead stranger into her home and asked no questions, about old Petra, who had examined her belly with gentle hands and kept her secrets. She would miss them. But she had been hiding for long enough. The woman who had fled through the servants' gate in the dead of winter with nothing but grief and a broken feather had been running from a lie. She had built a life on the assumption that the man she loved had betrayed her, and that assumption had been planted in her mind by the same people who had drugged the king and sent assassins to murder her in her bed. She was done running. By mid-morning, the advance scout returned with news that froze the warmth in Soraya's chest. My king, the Duskfang have taken Kervrith. Lord Oscair moved the moment your departure was confirmed. He had allies in the castle guard. Wolves turned by Duskfang gold months before the rite. The gates were opened from the inside. There was no siege. They simply walked in. Oscair had declared himself regent, claiming Rendal had gone mad. The Duskfang banner flew above the Iron Hall. The loyalists who could not escape had been taken prisoner. 43 wolves, including the healing ward staff. They were to be executed at sundown as traitors. Soraya's blood drained from her face. Yara, the head healer who had given her a chance. The kitchen women who had saved extra bread for her. Those people are prisoners because of me, Soraya said, because they were kind to a packless healer. I will not sit on a hillside and watch them die for it. Rendal studied her face, searching the bond for certainty. She let him find it. A fierce light kindled in his eyes. My Luna, he murmured, the title spoken for the first time without secrecy or shame. He turned to the assembled wolves. The Duskfang believe they have won. They believe that poison and treachery have earned them a throne that has never been theirs. They believe that the Alpha King has been broken. His voice carried across the gathering, not shouting, but resonating, the way an alpha's voice always did when it mattered. They are wrong. Howls rose from the assembled wolves, raw, hungry, and unified. We take back Kervrith before sundown. We free our people. And we show the Duskfang what happens to a house that dares to lay hands on the king's true mate and the heirs she carries. The army surged forward, and at its head, with his mate held close against his heart and his wolf burning behind his eyes, the Alpha King climbed toward his stolen throne. They reached the outer walls 2 hours before sundown. The castle was built into the mountain itself, its walls an extension of the living rock, its towers carved from granite spires. One main gate, reinforced with iron, 2 secondary gates sealed, and one entrance no invading force would think to use, the servants' gate. The same gate Soraya had fled through the night she left, barefoot and broken. It opens from the inside only, she told Rendal and Dagny, But there is a drainage channel beneath the eastern wall. It carries meltwater from the mountain spring into the lower kitchens, too narrow for a warrior or a shifted wolf, but a healer who has spent the better part of a year navigating these passages can fit. Rendell's wolf rose behind his eyes. You want to crawl through a drainage channel, while 7 months pregnant with twins. I want to open a gate that will save 43 people who are going to die in 2 hours. The channel is narrow. I am the only one who can fit, and who knows the route. The bond strained with his resistance, a physical force pushing against her decision. She could feel every protective instinct screaming inside him. But beneath the fear, she felt recognition. The same iron certainty he had found in her before. Rendell pressed his forehead to hers. His breath came in ragged pulls. If anything happens to you, then you will tear the mountain apart, I know. She allowed herself a small, broken smile. I have seen what your wolf does when it is angry. The Duskfang should be terrified. He kissed her. Not gentle, not tender. It was a kiss that tasted of fear and fury and a love so ferocious it bordered on violence. His hand cupped the back of her neck, pulling her into him, and through the bond she felt everything he could not say, every nightmare since the rite, every dawn he had greeted without her, every prayer he had sent into the void hoping she would hear it. 1 hour, he said. If that gate does not open, I am coming through the front wall. Soraya nodded. Then she turned and disappeared into the rocks. The drainage channel was exactly as she remembered. A narrow stone tube carved into the mountain's flank, barely 3 feet in diameter, choked with icy meltwater that soaked her dress and stole the feeling from her legs within seconds. She crawled. The babies shifted inside her, protesting the cold and the compression. Soraya whispered to them as she moved. Nonsense words, fragments of the lullabies her mother had sung in Kelmarsh before the raiders came. Promises that she did not entirely believe but spoke aloud anyway, because the sound of her own voice was the only warmth she had. The channel opened into the lower kitchens. Soraya emerged, dripping and shivering, into a room she knew as well as her own face. The hearths were cold. The long tables where servants had eaten their meals stood empty. The whole space felt abandoned, stripped of the warmth and noise that had once filled it. She wrung the water from her dress and moved into the servants' corridors. The passages were not empty this time. Duskfang soldiers patrolled in pairs, their footsteps echoing through the stone halls. Soraya pressed herself into alcoves and doorways, timing her movements to the rhythm of their patrols, relying on months of knowledge that no invading force could match. She reached the eastern tower in 20 minutes. The counterweight mechanism was hidden behind a false wall on the second landing, a series of iron chains and pulleys that connected to the servants' gate 3 floors below. Soraya had discovered it by accident during her first month at the castle, tracing a draft to its source and finding the ancient machinery behind a panel of loose stones. She pulled the stones free and examined the mechanism. The chains were thick with rust and disuse. The counterweight, a block of iron the size of a man's torso, hung suspended by a single locking pin. Soraya grasped the pin and pulled. It did not move. Rust had fused the pin to its housing. Footsteps in the corridor below, getting closer. She placed both hands on the rusted pin and let the white light flow into the metal, not the explosive blast, but something smaller, more precise. Heat. Enough to expand the iron, to break the seal of corrosion. The pin began to glow beneath her palms. The footsteps reached the stairs below her. Soraya pulled. The pin slid free. The counterweight dropped with a thunderous clang that shook the tower. Below, the servants' gate ground open. 2 Duskfang soldiers burst through the door behind her. They saw a pregnant woman standing before an open wall panel with her hands glowing white. Soraya screamed. Not fear. Challenge. a sound that carried through the stone corridors and out through the open gate to the wolves waiting beyond. Rendal's howl answered, deep, commanding, furious, followed by 200 voices joining in a wall of sound that made the castle tremble. She threw herself past the distracted soldiers and down the stairs. Behind her, the castle erupted into war. Rendal's forces poured through the servants' gate like water through a broken dam. Dagny led the first wave, her iron dark wolf form scattering the Duskfang guards before they could form a defensive line. Soraya moved through the chaos like a ghost. She knew this castle, its passages and shortcuts and forgotten rooms. While the battle raged in the main corridors, she slipped through the servants' routes toward the Iron Hall, the same hall where Rendal had declared Irenka his Luna, the same hall where Soraya's world had collapsed. She pressed her ear against the ancient doors. Voices inside, the clank of chains, the sound of someone weeping. She pushed the doors open. 43 wolves knelt in a line before the obsidian dais, hands bound with silver-threaded rope, the kind that burned wolfskin on contact. Their faces were marked with bruises and exhaustion. Yara, the head healer, had her white hair pooling on the stone floor. Behind the prisoners, 30 Duskfang soldiers stood with drawn blades. On the throne sat Lord Oskar Duskfang, silver-haired, sharp-featured, with the lean build of a wolf who had spent decades in politics rather than combat. His pale blue eyes carried the same calculating emptiness as his daughter's. Beside him, wearing a hastily forged crown, stood Irenka. The healer, Irenka said. How fitting that you would crawl back through the drains. Once a servant, always a servant. Soraya walked into the hall with her chin lifted, her steps steady despite the terror that coiled in her stomach like a living thing. Lord Duskfang, you have taken a throne that is not yours, imprisoned wolves who committed no crime, and attempted to murder the king's true mate and his unborn heirs. I am here to offer you a choice. Oscar's eyebrow rose. A choice? My dear girl, you are in no position to offer anything. You are a packless nobody carrying illegitimate pups, and you have just walked into a room full of my soldiers. Your soldiers are currently being torn apart by 200 loyal wolves who entered through the gate I just opened. Soraya let the words settle. The battle outside will be over within the hour. The only question is what happens in this room before it ends. Release the prisoners, Soraya continued. Surrender yourself and your daughter to the king's justice, and I will speak on your behalf when judgment is passed. Irenka laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Speak on our behalf? You, the king's little bedwarmer, presumes to offer us mercy? I am offering you survival, Soraya replied quietly, which is more than you offered me when you sent hunters to murder me in my bed. The hall fell silent. Oskar studied her for a long moment. Then he rose from the throne with deliberate calm. Kill her, and execute the prisoners, all of them. If we cannot hold the throne, we will leave nothing for the king to reclaim. 3 soldiers moved toward Soraya. Her power was spent. The birchwood, the gate. She had nothing left. The lead soldier raised his blade, and the babies moved. Not kicked, moved. A surge of energy from deep within her body that radiated outward through every nerve and bone. Power she had never felt before. Not her own healing light, but something wilder, more ancient. The combined legacy of an Alpha King's wolf and a healer's gift, forged together into something that had not existed in the bloodlines for 1,000 years. The children of a true mate bond were protecting their mother. White light consumed her entirely, blazing from every inch of her skin until she was a pillar of radiance in the center of the Iron Hall. Soldiers staggered backward. Even Oskar retreated a step. Pain ripped through her body. Her bones began to shift. The transformation she had been fighting since the night Rendal first bit her. The shift that should never have been possible for a packless woman with no wolf blood, was happening. Not despite her pregnancy, but because of it. The twins' power had unlocked what her own body had always lacked. Where a pregnant woman had stood, a wolf now crouched. Her fur was the color of fresh snow, pure, blinding white. Her eyes blazed with twin fires of gold and silver, one color from each parent, swirling together like molten metal. The Duskfang soldiers dropped their weapons. Their wolves submitted before their minds could process what was happening. Recognizing in the white wolf something that transcended bloodline and political allegiance. A true Luna, chosen not by ceremony, but by the spirits themselves. Soraya shifted back. The transformation left her breathless, her hands pressed to her belly where the twins pulsed with satisfied warmth. "Drop your blades," she said. "Every wolf in this room can feel the truth of what I am. You can choose to die for a lie, or you can choose to kneel." One by one, blades clattered to the stone floor. Irenka screamed. She snatched a sword from the nearest fallen weapon and charged at Soraya with murder twisting her face. She made it 3 steps. The iron hall doors exploded inward, torn from their hinges. Rendell's wolf, massive, black, eyes like molten ore, filled the doorway. The growl that rolled from his chest was not a warning. It was a verdict. Irenka dropped the sword. It rang against the stone floor like a bell tolling the end of something. Rendell shifted back and crossed the hall to where Oskar stood on the dais. "Lord Oskar Duskfang, you are charged with poisoning the Alpha King, subverting the Ascension Rite, conspiring to murder the King's true mate and his unborn heirs, treason against the crown, and the imprisonment of 43 innocent wolves. You will face judgment before the assembled bloodlines." Oskar said nothing. The calculating intelligence behind his pale eyes had gone blank, not with defiance, but with the recognition that the game was over. Rendell walked to Soraya. "You shifted," he whispered. "You have no wolf blood. It should be impossible. The children, they carry both of us. Your wolf and my healing. Together, it became something new." His hand found her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone with a tenderness that contradicted every violent thing he had done in the past hour. "I need to complete the bond," he said, "properly, the way it should have been done from the beginning, if you will have me." "I have been yours since the cave behind Ashfall Ridge," she said. "I never stopped. Even when I wanted to. Even when I tried." Rendell tilted his head, baring the side of his throat. A wolf offering the most vulnerable part of itself to the one it trusted above all others. "Claim me," he said. Soraya pressed her lips to the place where his pulse hammered beneath the skin. She felt his wolf rise to meet hers, the impossible white wolf greeting the black wolf that had torn apart a kingdom to find her. She bit down. The bond completed like a circuit closing. Through the bond, she saw everything. The night of the rite through his eyes, not the emptied shell on the dais, but the consciousness trapped behind it, screaming soundlessly as his body spoke words his soul would never have chosen. She felt the horror of waking with no memory, the suffocating panic of finding her chamber empty. His 3-hour sprint through the mountains in wolf form, running so hard his paws left blood on the stones. And he saw everything through hers. The gallery, the broken feather. 11 days of frozen mountains with his child keeping her alive. The cottage in Brackenmoor. The false name. The nights spent whispering to babies who would never know their father. The mark that darkened because the bond was not dying. It was fighting. For her. For them. For this moment. When she released him, they were both trembling. "My Luna," he breathed. "My king," she answered. Around them, wolves began to howl. The pack acknowledging what the spirits had ordained, what poison had tried to destroy, what months of separation could not extinguish. A bond that would not break. The judgment of the Duskfang took place 3 days later in the Iron Hall. Lord Oskar was sentenced to death for his crimes. His final words were addressed to Rendal. "You will never hold this kingdom without the Thorn Wall." Rendal's reply was 2 words: "Watch me." Irenka was stripped of her name, her wolf, and her claim to the Duskfang bloodline. She was exiled to the frozen reaches beyond the northern border, a land of ice and silence, where no pack ran and no fire burned. The wolves who watched her go did not look away. They wanted to remember. In the weeks that followed, Kervrith healed. The process was neither quick nor painless. The Duskfang loyalists who had turned their coats were given a choice: swear fealty to the true crown and serve a decade in the border guard, or follow Irenka into exile. Most chose to stay. The ones who left were not mourned. The completed bond between King and Luna radiated stability through the pack hierarchy, a spiritual anchor that every wolf in the kingdom could feel in their bones. The crops that had withered during the months of separation began to grow. The livestock settled. The kingdom breathed. Soraya was proclaimed Luna in a ceremony so different from the Ascension rite that it might have belonged to another world. No white gowns, no political candidates. Simply a woman standing beside her mate on the obsidian dais, her hand in his, her belly round with the heirs who had saved them both. The Iron Hall did not erupt with calculated approval this time. It wept. Warriors who had spent months searching for a woman they had never met bowed their heads and let tears fall openly. Servants who had covered for a packless healer and a king's forbidden visits smiled with the vindication of those who had known the truth all along. And at the front of the crowd, old Yara, the head healer, raised her voice in the ancient blessing reserved for true mates, words that had not been spoken in the Iron Hall for 5 generations. Soraya looked at the gallery where she had hidden on the night of the rite, watching from the shadows while her world collapsed. She looked at the pillar she had pressed her spine against while pain tore through her body. She looked at Rendal beside her and felt the bond pulse between them. Complete, unbreakable. He caught her gaze, smiled, and squeezed her hand. On a warm evening 6 weeks later, Soraya gave birth to twins. The boy came first, dark-haired like his father, amber-eyed, his cry strong enough to rattle the windows of the royal chamber. When the midwife placed him in Rendal's arms, the Alpha King held him with the same hands that had torn through armies and shattered fortress doors, and those hands were gentler than anything Soraya had ever seen. The girl followed moments later, silver-white hair, eyes that shifted between gold and pale blue like light through water. When she opened her mouth to cry, the sound carried harmonics that were not entirely wolf and not entirely human, and every shifted wolf in the castle lifted its head and listened. Rendal sat on the edge of the bed with a child in each arm, tears on his face for the second time in Soraya's memory. The first had been in the snow outside a ruined cottage, when he had pressed his nose to her belly and felt his children move for the first time. "Thank you," he whispered, "for surviving, for fighting, for believing in what we were, even when everything I did told you not to." Soraya traced the claiming mark on his throat, a perfect circle of white scar tissue that matched the one on her wrist. 2 marks, 2 wolves, 1 bond. "I never stopped believing," she said softly. "The mark would not let me. The bond would not let me. And these 2. She touched the boy's dark hair, then the girl's silver curls. "They would not let me. They kept me warm through frozen mountains. They are the reason I survived, Rendal. They saved me before they were even born." He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. A gentle kiss. A quiet one. Not the desperate, fire-edged kisses of reunion, but the steady warmth of 2 people who had passed through the worst of it and found each other on the other side. "My Luna," he murmured. "My heart. My home." Outside the window, the sun was setting over Kervrith, painting the mountain peaks in shades of copper and rose. The same mountains Soraya had crossed barefoot and alone, carrying nothing but grief and a spark of life she did not yet understand. The same mountains that had tried to swallow her and failed, because the woman who walked through them refused to stop walking. A howl rose from the courtyard below, then another, then dozens, then hundreds. The voices of every wolf in Kervrith lifting together in a chorus that rolled down the mountainside and across the kingdom like a wave. Not a howl of war, not a howl of grief, a howl of welcome. And in the great chronicles of Kervrith, a new entry was inscribed. The story of a pack-less healer who walked through fire and ice and heartbreak to become a queen. Of an alpha king who chose love over a kingdom and nearly lost both, only to reclaim them with the same ferocity that had made him king. Of a bond that was poisoned and broken and buried under months of silence, and refused, with stubborn, impossible, magnificent defiance, to die. They had found each other against every odd the world could stack against them, and they would never be parted again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.